I still remember the sound of the rain that day. It wasn't gentle. It was cruel, the kind that hits the earth like it's angry to exist. And maybe that's why it felt fitting, because that's exactly how my world felt to Dot. My father had just been buried. The only person who ever looked at me like I mattered was gone, and all that was left of him was silence and the woman who wore black not out of grief, but out of victory. My stepmother. If you've ever lost someone and then lost everything right after, you'll understand. She didn't wait a week, not even a day. The moment the condolences stopped, she walked into my room, my father's old study, where I'd been sleeping because the house didn't feel the same, and said words that carved themselves into my bones. You don't belong here anymore. That's all it took for words. And my entire life, every memory, every photograph, every dream was suddenly foreign. Before I continue, if you've ever been thrown away by the people you trusted, I want you to stay till the end, because this story, it's not just about pain. It's about power. It's about how losing everything became the reason I found myself. So, if my voice finds you tonight, please like, subscribe, and stay with me until the very last second, because I promise you'll never forget this story. When my stepmother kicked me out, I was 19, old enough to understand betrayal, but too young to know how to fight it. She told me my father's business was now hers, that he had changed the will before his death. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not grief, just hunger. I left that house with a single suitcase and a heart full of broken promises. No money, no plan, no family. The next few months blurred into survival. I slept on a friend's couch for a while, then in a small hostel room where the ceiling leaked every time it rained. Sometimes I worked 2 jobs, cafe waitress by morning, store clerk by night, just to afford bread and instant coffee. I'd sit by the window at 2 a.m., watching city lights through the fog, whispering to myself, "You're not done yet. You can't be done yet." But grief is tricky. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in waves. And sometimes, when I'd see a father and daughter laughing on the street, I'd have to turn away because my chest would ache too hard to breathe. There were nights I'd dream of my father's voice, calm, warm, steady. He used to tell me, if people take from you, don't chase what's gone. Build something new, something they can't destroy. So that's what I did. I found a small accounting course that offered night classes. I used almost every dollar I had left. It wasn't easy. Some days I couldn't afford dinner, but I never missed a single class, because every time I wanted to give up, I'd picture my stepmother sitting in that house, surrounded by my father's things, and I'd whisper, "Keep it. I'll build something bigger." Years passed, and with them, I changed. The scared girl who once cried outside her own home was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned to turn pain into purpose. When I got my first real job at a financial firm, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was becoming. And maybe that's the most beautiful revenge there is. My father's lessons echoed in every decision I made. Work hard. Stay kind. Never forget who you are, even when they do. So I did, and slowly, success followed. Within 5 years, I started my own company. It began small, just a consultancy service from a rented office space with flickering lights and secondhand furniture. But word spread, clients came, and I grew. By the time I turned 28, I was earning more than my father's business ever had. And that's when it happened. A call. A lawyer reached out, asking me to meet regarding property matters. I didn't think much of it until I saw the address. My father's house. I hadn't been there in almost a decade, And yet, as I stood outside those gates again, every memory came rushing back. The laughter, the smell of his cologne, the echo of my own footsteps on marble floors. She was there. My stepmother, older now, colder too, but in a way that looked like defeat. The lawyer explained that her company, my father's old business, was failing. She was drowning in debt and was being forced to sell assets. One of those assets was the house. When he said the price, I didn't even blink. I bought it on the spot. And when she realized who the buyer was, I'll never forget her face. Shock, shame, a bitterness she couldn't swallow. I didn't need to say anything, because the silence said it all. That night, when I walked through those doors again, this time not as a frightened girl, but as the owner, I felt the air shift. It wasn't revenge that filled my chest. It was peace, because I had come full circle. I stood in my father's old study, ran my fingers across the same desk where he used to sit, and whispered, "I did it, Dad. Just like you said, I built something they couldn't destroy." And you know what's strange? I didn't hate her anymore. She had taken everything, but in doing so, she'd given me something far greater. Strength, fire, freedom. Sometimes, the people who break you are just the hands of fate, pushing you toward the person you were meant to become. So, if you're listening to me right now, and you feel lost, abandoned, or betrayed, remember this: the pain you're feeling isn't your ending. It's your beginning. One day, you'll look back at the people who threw you away, and you'll thank them, not because of what they did, but because of what it made you do. I didn't go back to that house right away. Even after buying it, I let it sit empty for months, not because I didn't want to go there, but because I wasn't ready to face the ghosts that still lived inside those walls. You see, pain has a strange way of staying behind. It lingers in corners, whispers through the hallways, hides in old photo frames. And even when you think you've moved on, one look, one smell, one sound can pull you right back to the night it all fell apart. For me, that smell was rain. Every time it rained, I remembered that day, the day she kicked me out, standing in the doorway with my suitcase in my hand and tears mixing with the storm. So, before I went back, I waited for a sunny day. I wanted to walk into that house with light, not shadows. But before I tell you what happened when I finally did, let me take you back to the years in between, the ones no one saw, the ones where every win was built on sleepless nights and quiet tears. Because people see the success. They see the nice clothes, the confidence, the car, the house. But they never see the loneliness that built it all. There were nights when I'd sit on the floor of my tiny apartment, surrounded by bills, exhaustion gnawing at my bones, wondering if it was worth it, if starting over was bravery or stupidity, if my father would have been proud, or just sad that it came to this. But then, something beautiful happened. I met people who didn't see me as broken. A mentor at work, Mr. Rafiq, who told me, "You don't rise by hating them. You rise by refusing to become them." A friend, Lena, who would leave food at my door when I was too tired to cook. A stranger in a bus who smiled and said, "You look like someone who's going somewhere." It's strange how the smallest kindness can remind you that life hasn't given up on you. I started saving every penny I could. And then I made the boldest move of my life. I quit my stable job to start my own company. Everyone said I was crazy, but I remembered my father's words. If you don't build your own dream, someone will hire you to build theirs. At first, it was chaos. No clients, no office. Just me, a laptop, and faith that somehow it would all make sense. I designed my first business card myself, printed it in a local shop, and for a while, no one called. Then one morning, I got an email, my first client. A small clothing brand that needed financial restructuring. That one project changed everything because I poured my soul into it. And when it succeeded, word spread. By year 3, my company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We had a team, an office, clients from different cities, and yet, every milestone brought with it the same echo. Dad, I wish you could see this. Sometimes, I think that's why I worked so hard. Not for revenge, but for validation from someone who wasn't even alive to give it anymore. But life has a strange sense of timing. The same week I received an award for Young Entrepreneur of the Year, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in a decade. Her number. At first, I froze. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening like a fist around my heart. When I finally answered, her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Hello, it's me, as if I could ever forget. She told me she needed help. Her company, the one she stole, was drowning. Investors had backed out. She was on the verge of losing everything. I listened quietly, not out of pity, but because I wanted to understand what rock bottom sounded like for someone who once thought she was untouchable. When she finally paused, I asked, "Why are you calling me?" Her silence said it all. Because I was the only one left who could save her. It was strange, really. The same woman who once threw me into the streets now stood in front of me, begging for help. Life has a way of rewriting its own poetry. She wanted me to invest in her company, the company that was once my father's. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't say yes right away. I told her I'd think about it. But that night, as I sat on my balcony, looking at the city that had once swallowed me whole, I realized something. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. So I agreed. But on my terms. I became the majority shareholder, and within a year, I owned the entire company. She stayed on as a consultant for a while. It wasn't humiliation I wanted her to feel. It was understanding. I wanted her to see that power gained through cruelty never lasts, and she did. Slowly, I watched her change. The arrogance faded. The sharp tone softened. Once, she even said, quietly, "I was wrong about you." But by then, I didn't need her apology, because I had already forgiven her, not for her sake, but for mine. When I finally returned to my father's house months later, I walked in without fear. The sunlight streamed through the windows, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I could breathe there again. I touched the walls, the old piano, the photos that had gathered dust, and I realized something powerful. She had taken my home, but she could never take my roots. Because home isn't where you sleep. It's where your soul stands tall, unbroken, unbent, unafraid. And that day, standing in the middle of that house I now owned, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally found peace. It's strange how life has a way of circling back to the very places that once broke you. Years passed, and with every sunrise, I built myself from the ashes she left behind. I studied. I worked. I fought. There were days my hands shook from exhaustion, but I kept going because I promised myself no one, not even fate, would decide my worth again. I started my own business, small at first. Just me, a rented space, and secondhand furniture. But passion has a strange power. It multiplies when mixed with pain. Within a few years, that tiny space grew into something bigger, something real. I was no longer the girl who cried outside a locked gate. I was the woman who bought that very house back, brick by brick, memory by memory. When I returned, the town barely recognized me. And when she saw me again, my stepmother, the woman who once threw me into the streets with nothing but shame, her face froze. She was older now, weaker. Time had carved guilt into her features. Her once sharp tone trembled when she said my name, Mayra. I just smiled, a calm, unshakable kind of smile. She tried to speak, words stumbling out between regret and disbelief. I didn't know you'd make it this far. And I said softly, I didn't either. But maybe that's what made me unstoppable. For a long moment, there was silence. Then she whispered, your father would be proud. And that broke something inside me, not in pain, but in peace. Because finally, I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her validation. I had already become everything she thought I never could be. That night, I walked through the house, each room whispering memories I thought I had buried. My father's photos still hung in the hallway. I touched it gently, tears filling my eyes. I made it, Abu. I whispered. I made it, just like you always said I would. You know, revenge doesn't always come wrapped in anger or noise. Sometimes it's quiet, found in the peace of knowing you've risen far above what tried to destroy you. Today, I live with gratitude. I built schools in his name, helped girls who were told they're not enough, and shared my story, not to boast, but to remind them your pain doesn't define you. Your strength does. If you're watching this and you've ever been thrown away, left out, or broken, I want you to know something. One day, the same world that turned its back on you will turn its head in awe. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you proved yourself right. And that's the sweetest kind of victory.